Welcome to Calming the Chaos, where I help you find peace in a chaotic world. I'm Tracy Cannella, licensed mental health counselor who talks about chaos from a mental health perspective. And I give you self-help resources you can use to calm your chaos in any situation in this world. Isn't this fun? It's not a substitute for counseling or psychotherapy, but just a lot of helpful hints and tools. So if you're on board, feel free to tune in. And now, let the chaos begin. Today is Monday, November 4th, 2024, and it is, dare I say it, Election Day Eve. And there's a lot of chaos going on, as per usual, in the world, and especially in the United States of America. And so I'm hoping that I will get this episode out before the election because I have a special guest today. Her name is Phyllis Leavitt, and she and I are going to be talking about her book. Her book is called America in Therapy, a new approach to hope and healing for a nation in crisis. And basically, she sees things from a psychological standpoint, and the United States is on the table. I don't know if we're going to go into diagnosing the United States, but we could go there. The book does see America from a psychological point of view, and the goal is to have a national conversation about bringing the best of what heals our relationships and restores us to safety. So now I'm going to bring Phyllis Leavitt up so we can have a conversation about this. Phyllis, welcome to Calming the Chaos podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me here with you. It's really an honor and a delight, and the timing, I guess, couldn't be any better.
I know. Can you feel the tension rising in the ranks here? I'm not sure if you can where you are. You are in New Mexico, correct?
I think everybody I know feels it. I think it's probably widespread.
I think so. Yeah. I was just listening to a Diary of a CEO today, and he was interviewing somebody who's an election predictor. And he said, boy, you can feel the difference from the UK to the US as far as tension goes right now. And I'm not really sure it's about who will win the election, but understanding the system that we're in and maybe make some changes within ourselves too. So let's hear a bit about you and the work you do, and we can go into talking about what you have to say in your book.
Yeah, I've been a psychotherapist for well over 30 years, and I did a lot of therapy myself, especially when I was younger and in a lot of chaos and turmoil in my own life, and had a lot of unanswered questions about why I felt the distress that I was feeling in my life. And psychology and psychotherapy were such an eye-opener for me to understand that my early conditioning and the values and role models and the environment that I lived in had so much to do with how I felt about myself, how I felt about other people, what my expectations were of myself and others, what I considered success, all of that. That I became a psychotherapist myself, and I've worked with hundreds of people. And of course, in that field, have been witness to so much family dysfunction and so many ways that people can be hurt if they're not living in a healthy or relatively healthy family system that supports them to be their greatest self. Was somewhere along the line from my own personal experience being in therapy and from working with so many people who had really suffered in one way or another emotional neglect or abuse or sexual or physical violence or societal prejudice, that it was not easy, not hard to see that we live in all kinds of family systems, not just our family of origin, that our community, our gender, our race, our religious orientation, our economic status, our states, our country are all family systems that operate on family dynamics that are either healthy or not. They're either loving and kind and safe and supportive, or they can be highly abusive and neglectful and targeting of vulnerable people and exclusive. And so it was really kind of the big aha quite a while ago for me to realize that our country operates on family systems dynamics as well. And what are they? And are they serving us? Are they healthy? Do they encourage the best? Do they encourage peace? Do they encourage cooperation? Or do they operate to some extent, and I think sometimes to a large extent, on what I would consider dysfunctional and abusive family dynamics? And if so, how can we make that general knowledge and how can we address it from a healing point of view, not a blaming, shaming, hating point of view, but sort of like, let's look at what the problems really are from a psychological point of view, like we do in any family. And what can we do as a family of America to bring ourselves back to a place of healing and cooperation and safety and peace? So that's really the undercurrent of my book. And I wrote it for the layman. It's not, you don't have to be a therapist to understand it. And I use lots of examples from myself, from my client, base, and from just my professional experience to really try to make that common knowledge so that together we can try to heal the extremes of escalating violence and divisiveness here in America.
Yeah, violence is something that is the target focus point of your book here. The target. Yeah, of course, I said that when we talk about violence, right?
Right.
So, yeah, do you want to say a little bit? Do you have a theory about why we as Americans are acting out so violently?
Well, one thing I want to say is that violence begets violence. And I think we kind of know that in our own lives. When people are really hurt by other people or institutions, um, they have a reaction. And whether they express it as anger or not, most of us feel very angry if we're hurt by other people and feel powerless to protect ourselves. So that anger can turn inward, it can turn outward, or both. And also there's lots of other symptoms that are caused by people being hurt by other people. But what in the big picture, one of the things that I want to say, and I think there's a lot of big picture elements, and you feel free to add some that come to your mind. But one of them is, we have a history of coming from trauma, unhealed trauma. Our whole country has been, from the very beginning, except for the Native Americans who were here, many of the people who settled America from the very beginning were fleeing trauma. They were fleeing poverty. They were fleeing persecution. They were fleeing war. They were fleeing imprisonment. Um, and at a time in American history where we didn't talk about trauma, we just were on survival. People came here and they were on survival, trying to have a new life in a new land and prosper and start over, and provide for their families. And so we have a history of unhealed trauma. And in fact, I think the whole human race does. But looking at America, we have a history of unhealed trauma. And we know from the field of psychology that when we don't get a chance to heal from the hurt that's been done to us by other people, we can turn that against ourselves and we can turn that against others. And we can either become, and there's lots of symptoms of unhealed trauma, but two big ones are that we feel very powerless because we've been so overpowered, and we are then easily overpowered again. Or many people identify with the aggressor and they become like the people who have hurt them. And so, we have a history from the very beginning of targeting other people, specifically Native Americans and Black people, for extreme levels of abuse and murder and torture and exploitation. And, in therapy, and you're probably very familiar with this, in therapy, most people come to talk in the beginning about the harm that they feel has been done to them. It's a little harder for us as individuals to talk about the harm we might have caused other people. But that's part of the healing process, is that we make it safe to talk about it all. And I think that's part of why I say, let's have America in therapy, because I think we need to make it safe for ourselves and healing for ourselves, not in terms of retaliation or retribution or more hatred and blame, to talk about also how we've hurt many people here and continue to hurt many people here as well as abroad, and take accountability for that. And again, for the purpose of healing, for the purpose of coming back together. Um, so these are some of the big strokes that I try to address in looking at America today, because I think we need to make it safe to own it all.
How does America get into therapy then? Do we do it on our individual little bubbles and within ourselves, so the micro, or is it a macro, like let's have a big group session here and have a big Zoom call where everybody gets to participate? Well, how do you envision that playing out?
I see it, and I talk about this a little bit in my book on all those levels, because I think we have to look at ourselves as individuals, and many people are. Many people are on a healing journey here in America, and the stigmas around psychotherapy and healing are lifting. I don't think that they're totally lifted, but I think it's more of a commonly accepted way to find some relief from the pain that we're in. But I think we have to look at our families large and small. We have to look at our systems large and small at the same time. So I think it's a multi-pronged approach, and I think the beginning, and this is one of the big reasons why I wrote this as a book, is to educate ourselves. Many, many people have no training or understanding of how our psyches work. I didn't when I grew up. I had no idea why I felt and behaved the way I did, why I was attracted to the people I was attracted, why I reacted the way I did. I had no clue. I just thought I was a flawed person for the most part, as many
Mhm.
of us do. And it wasn't until I got some understanding of the conditioning that I had received and some of the traumas that I went through that I began to make sense to myself and had an opportunity to heal and change some of the ways that I was operating in the world, and especially in relationship. And that's what I'd like to bring to America, that basic education that we're not flawed people, we're not a flawed country, but we're operating on some very unconscious and unhealthy family dynamics and individual dynamics.
Is there a history sort of aspect to the book? Because I know that when I see a person, I will do a genogram, I will take the family history. Do you go into the history of America in the book and provide some context for what brings us here today, so divisive and mean and ugly to each other sometimes?
Well, I talk about it. I talked about, some of our origins with how we treated the Native Americans when we came here. It's like, this is our country. We've conquered you. We have a right to take what we want. Those are some of the origins. And of course, those kind of values and behaviors are not exclusive to America. People have been doing these kinds of things all over the world, conquering other people and taking from them. But it's part of, I think it's part of our human nature to conquer and subjugate what it is people we want, or take territory or resources that we want. But I think what's different in the world today is that one tribe might have killed another, one country might have invaded another and taken it, for its own. But the threat to all human life and all life on the planet was not on the table as it is today. That the ways that we can try to conquer and take from one another are potentially lethal to all of us, to all life on the planet. Just like if you look at an individual family, if there is unremitting abuse and neglect and violence and hatred going on within a family, or withholding of resources, or excommunicating people, at some point in some families, those who have been hurt will act out back, and they'll commit terrible crimes against their perpetrators. And it's an understandable psychological evolution of our behavior. And so I think we have to realize, as a nation and really as a world population, that the stakes are higher for the entire viability of the human race than they've ever been before. And real quickly, I'll say one of the things that brings people to therapy is pain. When things are really not working and it's so bad that we get opened up to, like, okay, what's causing this, and is there another way? Is there some way for me to heal? Is there another way for me to be? Is there something else I can learn differently? And my hope is that in America, we will pick that up and take that as a nation and say, this level of divisiveness, this level of escalating violence, this escalation in mass murders, this these threats of civil war again in our own country, this is enough. We need help. Can we turn to the experts in human relations the way we turn to experts for our computers and our cars and our devices? Can we turn to the experts in human relations now because this is enough?
Yeah. I don't know that many people see it as being in pain, but that's exactly what it is. Sometimes the anger and the behaviors that we see, the emotions and the behaviors are because we're in pain, and that's a defense, right? So here we are, and well, they taught me in hypnotherapy school to find what is hurting and heal it.
Right.
How do we as Americans find what is hurting us first off, and then we can move into the healing part and what you suggest in your book?
Yeah. Well, and again, I say it's a multi-pronged approach, but let's talk about it from the individual level because I think that's maybe more understandable to the average person than if we talk about the macro in kind of general terms. So my experience, and probably yours is similar, is that when people come to therapy, they're usually suffering not only from something that happened to them, but some way that they're not functioning in their life today that is really working for them. Their relationships aren't working. They're having difficulty with their children. They can't keep a job, or they can't, they don't have a job that they really want, or they're really stifled in their self-expression and their creativity, or they're chronically ill and it looks like there's an emotional component. Whatever it is that brings people to therapy, most often we can trace something back, especially in the realm of dysfunctional human relations that aren't working now in our lives today, to some dysfunction that we suffered as children and or in some aspect of our growing up, some way that someone hurt us or blamed us or, maybe physically violated or sexually violated us, or some way that because of the color of our skin, we were the target of discrimination from an early age on the playground. Um, and that when people are really allowed to go into that pain without judgment, without fear of being re-traumatized, and let me say, I have never worked with anyone who was re-traumatized by going into the pain that they sustained. When we're in a non-judgmental, safe, and caring environment with someone who has some skill, there is relief in working through that pain, not re-traumatization, which I think many people fear.
Mhm.
And inevitably, if a person really hangs out and does the work, which, so many people do today, they come out of that more loving, more caring, more socially responsible, more responsible in their relationships, more able to take responsibility and stop blaming other people, or safely leave relationships that are toxic.
Mm.
Um, and I've never seen it otherwise. I've never seen anybody work on what hurt them and become more hateful, more violent, less cooperative, or more harmful to other people in any way. I've never seen it. So when we give ourselves that beautiful space to heal our own wounds, we inevitably want to share that healing in some form. You don't have to become a therapist, but we want to share that love. We want to share that self-acceptance. We want to share that open-heartedness or aliveness with the people around us. And so a lot of it's really like the grassroots level of, being willing to examine ourselves. Because we also know that many, many of the people who are the most violent perpetrators in our society today are very unhealed victims of terrible treatment by other people.
Right. Hurt people is what they say, right? Whoever
Mhm.
they are.
Mhm.
What role does our own perception and our own perceptions, if you will, play in this? So we could have trauma in our background, yes, but maybe we don't, and we're just perceiving things. Do you even talk about the misperceptions that people could have that could even cause their behaviors or emotions to just go off the charts and cause some chaos? Let's just be honest. Yeah, how much do our perceptions actually play into all this?
Well, I think, and you tell me if this is what you're kind of asking about. Um, not everybody is traumatized. But I also do want to say that I think there are a lot of people who have sustained significant hurt from other human beings, more people that have than we realize as a society. Because the stories I hear, from people who look like they're functioning in the world, they get up, they get dressed, they go to work, they take care of their kids. Sometimes the level of abuse and neglect or harm that they have received and that they're just struggling so hard to cope with is much more than many of us would know or would like to even know. But that being said, not everybody is traumatized. Some people grew up in, relatively safe, caring homes for sure. Um, but this is where I think the family of America dynamics really play a huge role. If you grow up in a relatively safe home, but in your environment, you're told over and over again by people in power that a certain race is bad or less than, or a certain gender is inferior, or some people don't deserve help. They should just pull themselves up by their bootstraps. If that conditioning is strong enough and pervasive enough, and you're not exposed to a variety of opinions and points of view, and encouraged and taught to have an open mind and look at things from many different points of view, you can easily be convinced that certain people are bad and deserving of harmful treatment. And I think there's a lot of that also going on in our country today, that people are being brainwashed to target certain populations for the ills of the world, when that's an abuse dynamic. Actually, that's what abusers do in families. They convince the rest of the family that that person deserved to be beaten, or she asked for it because she wore a short skirt, or he deserved to be beaten because he was failing in school, or he talked back. And then other people get on board with that, and I've seen that with people that I've worked, people whose siblings were forced or encouraged to participate in the abuse and continued to be in that role when they grew up as adults. So there's a lot to be said about the larger social influence. And that's why I talk about us as the family of America. What are we teaching our children? What are our leaders teaching our families and our children and our businesses? And is that something that we really want to learn? Is that something we really want to have happen to us?
It seems like we can't agree upon that though, Phyllis. And it just seems like in this world today, we're not wanting to have these conversations and try and understand it. Because when you said that about the schools, I immediately thought, well, we can't agree what to keep into the curriculum and what to keep out. And we don't have the Pledge of Allegiance anymore. And we don't have this, but we do have that. And people cannot seem to agree. Would you agree?
Absolutely, and I think that it's only gotten worse in terms of the violent emotion that's behind that disagreement and the threats of actual violence that accompany it now. And I think that one of the big reasons for that, or one of the contributing factors, let me just say, because everything, kind of snowballs. It starts here and then it snowballs and then it repeats itself and it morphs. But what I would say is that we there's two really big things here that go together. And part of what I talk about in my book is the big picture, the big paradigms that we're still living under that are not helping us find peace or cooperation or acceptance of one another. And one of them is that we live in a very win-lose paradigm still. Somebody has to win and somebody has to lose. And one of the ways that we go about trying to ensure that we win is to paint our opposition as terrible and evil and deserving of harm or deserving of suppression or whatever. And so what happens is we don't have a commitment to actually learn how to sit down and talk to each other. And that's what happens in good therapy. People People come to therapy, especially like if you take couples that come to therapy, they've been fighting. They're at odds with each other. They're angry. They're hurt. They're feeling very divisive or separated or antagonistic, and they still want something from each other while they're fighting, right? And part of good therapy is to really help people sit down and learn the skills for deep listening, because part of that win-lose paradigm, which we're so stuck in America today and probably all over the world, is I'm right and you're wrong. But the other person feels the same way. They feel that they're right and I'm wrong. And and so we're just at loggerheads and we're in a tug of war and we're still trying to beat the other person into some kind of silence or submission or shame or blame or whatever, or punishment, rather than we're all human beings. We all really want to be heard. We all want to be heard. We all want to be respected. We all want to be spoken to, um, well, not like shouted at or threatened. And can we learn to give that to each other? And you may or may not be aware, you may be aware of this, but there's an organization, and I think there's more organizations than this one, but one that I learned about was called the Braver Angels. And they bring people from the red side and the blue side together to just sit down and talk. And invariably, what they've found is that they have much more in common than they have differences. And they listen to one another with respect and with openness, and they get a sense of their shared humanity. And that's a commitment that I think we can make. We don't have to agree.
Mhm.
You don't have to be in my religion. I don't have to be in your religion. You don't have to have the same exact way that you bring up your children that I do. But can I leave you in peace if I don't agree with you? Or do I still believe that I have the right to force you to do what I want? Because we know in families that doesn't work. That doesn't work for couples. That doesn't work for parenting. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. It just breeds more animosity, divisiveness, and sometimes violence.
I had not heard of that organization, but I'm definitely going to check it out because I've been saying that for years that we have much more in common that we realize than we do have differences. So one of the examples I like to give is I value safety. I might purchase a camera system for my home while Joe down the street purchases a firearm,
Right.
right? So we do have the same values. Sometimes our behaviors and our actions don't express the same thing that our neighbors would. But that's
Right.
no reason not to sit down at the table and hear them out.
Right. And in good mental health, we don't hurt each other when we disagree. That's kind of a bottom line. It's kind of a no duh. And yet somehow we haven't translated that to our larger family dynamics in our communities or in our states or in our governments. We haven't translated that. And yet it's a sign of ill mental health if a parent beats their child because they didn't comply with something that the parent said. And yet we're beating each other psychologically and threatening all kinds of violence toward people who don't agree with our point of view. And so I call this a mental health crisis that we are being taught and programmed to believe is an ideological difference, when in fact it's a mental health crisis.
Ah, but when we're in therapy, we have the opposing parties, but we also have the therapist, right?
Yes.
So
Right,
what does America have? And if
right.
America was put in therapy, who would be the therapist?
I mean, and that's really the question. And I think, first of all, we have to want it. People don't come to therapy unless they're court ordered. But for most people who come to therapy, they want it badly enough because something isn't working badly enough. And so I think that we have to understand, and that's part of the thrust of my book, is to help us understand how badly it's not working and what the consequences are to all of us. So, I have so many ideas about how we could change the way we work together in government. And of course, we would have to want this and we would have to ask for it and we would have to have it happen. But that would be like trained mediators in Congress, actually teaching people the skills for nonviolent conflict resolution and deep listening. um, and holding to certain boundaries, not with shame and blame or anger, but holding to the boundaries that facilitate that happening. And what an amazing role model for our country that would be if we had a Department of Peace.
Hmm.
Instead of just, Department of the Military and Defense, what if we had a Department of Peace? What if we made peace studies part of our curriculum, teaching people nonviolent communication skills and nonviolent conflict resolution skills from childhood? What if we, when there was an issue about, what to do about taxes or what to do about the economy or what to do about climate change or what to do about racial divide, any issue at all, what if we actually invited everybody to the table? The people who are affected by our policies, the people who have studied these things, the people who have tried different approaches, people from different religions, from different economic groups, from different genders, from different orientations and racial groups. What if we invited everybody to the table to actually participate in deep listening rather than cementing one point of view and trying to beat each other over the head with that? These are all things that we could ask for as a country. And my hope is that we can educate ourselves enough that we will start to ask for this from our leaders.
Are you talking about a peace summit or a national peace summit? Even if it's just in the United States, let's
Yeah.
just have a
Right.
summit.
Mhm. Yeah.
Wow.
And the
Yeah,
benefits of that, who in their own life benefits from war in their household? Nobody.
possibly the person in power does, right?
Yeah,
We see that,
right.
but that the person in power often doesn't want to change because everything's going the way he or she wants it to go, right?
But then we're talking about abusive psychological and or physical dynamics in a family, and that's what I'm trying to identify in my book, because that's what's happening. One of the reasons why we're not seeing the things that I'm talking about is because it does benefit the people in power.
Well, let's take a look, speaking about your book, as we have been, and we will continue to do. Let's see if we can just go ahead and take a look at this book. Do you see it here?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Yeah. So there it is. And it's actually also in Phyllis's background. It's right behind her in her screen, but this is the book. And this is actually her website here. And that's www.phyllisleavitt, and that's PhyllisLeavitt.com. And there is a little tab there, as you can see, for her book. So I love this. It doesn't have to be this way. Let's have a summit.
Yes, and it doesn't have to be this way, and anybody in their own life who has participated in any kind of a healing journey, whether it's with themselves in their own history and or with partners or children or people they work with or with friends, can tell you there's nothing like it when we reconnect and we feel like we belong and we feel safe and we feel valued and we feel supported to be our best selves. And that's what therapy in its best form really tries to provide. It's not perfect. None of us do this perfectly, but we don't have to do it perfectly. We just have to be committed to trying. And, what I want to say to people out there is if you've had the experience of having anyone who really sees you for your for your beauty, for your essence, even if you're layered over with dysfunctional behavior or pain or depression or anxiety or addiction, whatever it is, when we see each other in our essence, it is healing all by itself. You don't have to be a therapist to do that. And I can tell you, I have a distinct memory of the first person who saw me that way, and I was about, I don't know, I was about 20, I think, and it was life-changing for me, and we can give that to each other. People are amazing when they're allowed to flower and grow into their most essential selves. People don't grow into tyrants. They are conditioned through harmful behavior to become abusers and despots and exploiters and rapists. Nobody's born that way.
Do you think there's hope for America? Really? Just your honest opinion about that.
I do think there's hope because I think we're a mass of individuals. And I believe that there's hope for any given individual. And I do want to say, I think there's people who are so hurt, who are so who have been abused, that we don't know how to repair. We don't know how to help them come back and be safe for other people around them. So there's people we don't know how to treat, but there are so many more people that we do. And I think that's where we focus. We focus on what we can do. So is there hope for America? I don't know what it will take to shift this us against them kind of mentality. What I do know is that we can each do the part that we feel called to play. And one of the things that I think is plaguing many people in our country today, because I hear this from people, there's nothing I can do. I've even heard people say, well, you know what? Maybe it's just time for the human race to be gone from the earth. The earth would be better off without us. We're just destroying the earth anyway. And I think that's really sad, because that's actually what an abusive system wants. It wants you to feel powerless. It wants you to feel like there's nothing you can do to escape or heal or change the system. And so what I just try to stay focused on is, I don't know the outcome. But what I do know is that if we encourage each other to be our most loving, peaceful, contributing selves, and we see the good in each other, and we do everything that we can each do, we have a chance. I really think that.
Here's my fear, Phyllis, and I just want to know what you think too, because so often we don't make these changes until we reach rock bottom. And my fear
Yeah.
is that we won't make these changes and we'll reach this rock bottom. And we really do not have to reach the rock bottom. We can start making these changes now, and we don't have to reach the rock bottom. What do you think about that?
I agree with you. I do think that that's what happens in people's individual lives. As I said, often people don't go to therapy until it's bad enough, and until it's really bad, or they don't get sober until, their whole life is falling apart, or they have cirrhosis, or they've lost everything and everyone. And yes, I hope we don't have to hit that kind of rock bottom. I hope we don't have to ever have a civil war here, or engage in a third world war, have contributed to climate change in such a way that you know, masses of people just are killed. Um, I hope it doesn't take that. And that's why one of the reasons why I wrote my book. Can we all sound the alarm before we go under? You know,
Right.
but I agree with you. Sometimes it really takes being in massive pain before people are willing to make a change. But, we talk about the mass murderer, for instance, right? And we now know that so many of these people who have gone into schools or malls or grocery stores or parking lots and shot up random people that they don't even know are really hurting, really hurting people who never got help, who are filled with rage, who have never, who have lost their sense of our shared humanity. And we say, we need to identify these people before they explode. That's what
Right.
we need to do. We need to find them help. We need to contain them before they go on a rampage. And I think it's the same for our country. We need to identify our own terrible behaviors before we explode on each other or explode more around the world.
Yeah. Take a look in the mirror, maybe, right?
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Well, here is again the title of the book, America in Therapy, A New Approach to Hope and Healing for a Nation in Crisis. This is Phyllis Leavitt, and she can be found on her website, phyllisleavitt.com. Phyllis, any parting words? You've been a great guest, and I think I'll be able to get this episode out before the election.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, there's so many parting words I want to say, but one of the things I do want to say is that, um, none of us are islands. And I think one of the great contributions of psychotherapy is that we really realize the importance of our family systems, and that we're not just born, we are born with our individual nature, but we're so conditioned by the way we're nurtured, by the role models that we have around us and the behaviors around us. And so I think we have to realize that as a country, we're not an island either. We're part of a global community. And what we do here in America and the choices we're going to make tomorrow are going to reverberate around the world. And can we be responsible for that?
Mhm. Well, I really appreciated having you as a guest today. I think in parting, I would just like to say, if you have not voted yet and you don't intend to tomorrow, please rethink that. I have my I voted sticker here, and I'm going to wear it all day tomorrow. Hopefully you out in the audience and in the world will choose to do that as well. Your voice matters.
Right.
All
Thank
right. Phyllis, thank you so much for the work you do and for writing this book, and for being a guest here on the podcast today. I appreciate you.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you, and thank you for allowing me to share my take on what I think could help us all.
Absolutely. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Calming the Chaos podcast. If you found this podcast interesting or helpful, please like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. You can also go to www.calmingthechaospodcast.com to listen to all Calming the Chaos podcast episodes. I look forward to sharing my next podcast episode with you. In the meantime, take care.